In this C-Flush video, we'll take you through the process of replacing a paper element in a Racor fuel filter and then a separate spin-on fuel-water separator. We will also take a look at the contents of the fuel filter to try to give an explanation of what's going on in the gas tanks. This boat has a cross-feed fuel manifold where fuel comes in from each port and starboard tank on the top and then can be cross-fed or run directly to each port and starboard engine. We will start by closing all the valves to prevent any fuel from siphoning or spilling out when we open the filters. Before opening any of the fuel filters, I'm going to turn on the blower, and then I'll mute that sound so you don't have to hear it throughout the video. We start by placing a clean bucket under the Racor 500 series fuel filter, and then use a wrench to pull the drain plug out of the bottom of the filter. To speed up the process, we loosen the T-handle on the top of the fuel filter to vent the canister. After the fuel has stopped draining, we remove the T-handle on the top of the fuel filter and then pull the lid off the top of the filter. We want to make sure that the black O-ring gasket comes along for the ride. From the top, we then pry up on either side of the paper element to remove it from the filter housing. The new paper element looks nice and clean. You can see it comes with 2 new gaskets, and you'll see this is a 10 micron filter, sufficient for these gas motors. The paper element slides snugly in place on the center post. Before putting the cap in place, you want to make sure that the black O-ring is securely seated into this groove. If it's not, it can either leak fuel, which is an obvious hazard, or it'll draw air and the engine won't run. This can be a tough one to diagnose. If this fuel filter was for a diesel engine, we would have poured diesel fuel into the empty canister. This is because diesel engines can't process air like a gas engine can. Moving on, the T-handle bolt also gets its own gasket before being screwed in place. We then secure the drain plug back in place before opening the fuel valve for that filter. We repeated the process for the other engine's filter, and shown here are the 2 different buckets with the contents of the fuel filters. You can see the bucket on the left has far more sediment than the bucket on the right. I'm okay with this given the fact that I ran this tank dry during the season. What you don't see here is very much, if any, water in the fuel. And that's given the fact that when I go to the fuel dock, I bring my wallet and fuel stabilizer. I always add fuel stabilizer when I take on fuel. This way it stops the fuel degradation as early as possible. It could be months, if not the following season, before I burn through all the gas. Next, we'll move on to the fuel-water separator used for the generator. You'll notice that this filter is mounted pretty high in the bilge. That's actually the port fuel tank in the background. Because it's mounted so high, siphoning is not an issue. We simply unscrew the filter and pour the contents into the bucket. This fuel sample looks much cleaner than the samples for the engine. There's 2 reasons for this. First, there's only about 20 or 30 gallons that ran through this filter. And second, this style of fuel-water separator tends to trap the debris in the paper element, whereas the Racor lets you drain the dirt off the bottom. Before installing the new fuel-water separator, we wipe a little motor oil onto the gaskets. This will make the canister easier to unscrew the next time we change the filter. The new canister is simply screwed in place and then secured hand tight like it would an oil filter. This process has left us with 3 clean but empty fuel filters. So before I leave the dock, I run both engines and the generator at a high speed to purge the air from the system. I want to make sure the engines don't stall once I leave the slip. After disposing of the waste gasoline, I make sure to reward a job well done. If this process seemed simple and straightforward, you should check out our other YouTube videos on cleaning and winterizing the raw water systems of engines, generators, and air conditioners.